right, next up, we have another fellow, Holly T. Bird. She is San Felipe Pueblo. She is an attorney, a tribal judge, and an activist for Indigenous people and also for Mother Earth. She, after providing services for as a civil ground coordinator and co-ED for Water Protector Legal Collective, she's now the co-ED of Title Track, a Michigan nonprofit organization dedicated to youth, racial equity, and water. She is deeply committed to the rights of Indigenous people, climate justice, and missing and murdered women. And tonight she's going to be talking to us about our rights. So excited to have you meet Holly.
Hi, Gina. It's so good to see you too.
Oh, fabulous. I'm so glad you're here to teach us our rights. We need to know this stuff.
I enjoy putting on my attorney hat, for our people whenever I can. So I'd love to introduce myself. I'm Shaskawasakway Indishnakas, Nimki and Dodom, Traverse City and Donjaba, San Felipe Pueblo and Donjaba. I live here in the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa community. I grew up in Michigan, so I speak the language here, but I am of San Felipe Pueblo, as well as a lot of the people from our Southwest relatives. So, but I'm so happy to be here and so honored. Thank you so much.
Great. So you're going to be in our brand new video that we're going to launch right after you speak. But tell us, why is it important to vote?
Well, whether we like it or not, as Native people, U.S. policies and laws affect our people, and in particular, they affect our Mother Earth. So we've seen this in many ways. Standing Rock, everything that happened there turned into political. What did the U.S. do today? And so it's really important for us to be involved in that process, even if we don't like it, even if for some reason we feel that process feels like colonization to us, we still need to participate in order to have a seat at the table. And as one of my friends, Dallas Goldtooth, said, he loves the idea of being able to pick his opponent.
So how can a person find out if they're eligible to vote?
So states have different voter registration deadlines and requirements. So make sure that you're registered well in advance of Election Day. That's the number one thing. And the way that you do that is you check in. There's a couple sites that are national that allow you to do that. One is www.nass.org/can-I-vote. And there they'll take you to a site where you can enter in your information, and they'll find out for you if you're registered to vote. You can also go to your local or state websites. I know like Michigan has websites like that. Several states have their own voter registration website. So that's the first thing. If you don't have access to a website or to the internet, then you should call your local clerk or the Secretary of State or clerk of voter registration within your state. Now, if you're not registered to vote, you can go to vote.gov to find out what your options are.
Okay, great. Good. And then once a person is registered, what kind of ways are there? What options do they have to vote?
So there's a couple of different ways. And again, you'll have to find out from your state which one is available and what the deadlines are. So one of the very first ways that most people vote is by absentee ballot. Mm-hmm. That's when you apply for and receive a paper ballot in the mail. And with that, you can drop it off at the clerk's office, you can mail it in, or you can deliver it right to a drop box in your township or your voting precinct in lieu of going to the polls on November 3rd. For most states, you can do that. That's also called early voting. And you can do that well ahead of the of Election Day. And some states actually allow you to turn those in on Election Day at the polls. So if you choose to do that instead of mailing it in or dropping it off or giving it to a clerk, for a lot of states you could show up at the polls and have them spoil that absentee ballot for you and give you another paper ballot to to vote with. So again, though, it's always important to know when the deadline to request an absentee ballot is, and for most states that has already passed. Another way is to, simply, and I do have to say this, if you have an absentee ballot and you haven't dropped it off yet, make sure you sign it. That's one of the number one ways that absentee ballots get challenged and invalidated. So make sure you sign it. The other way, of course, is in person. So you go to your polling place with a form of photo ID, and really that's only to identify you by face. It doesn't have to be, it's not supposed to establish your residency. So tribal IDs should work.
I was just going to ask that.
Yes, they're supposed to work, and you should check with your state's requirements. But this is the number one question we as Native people get or the challenge that we get is that our tribal ID isn't valid, and that is simply not true. So, according to the Federal Bureau of Elections, yes, a tribal ID should work. But also be mindful of the fact that if you have to show up for a proof of residency for some reason, let's say there's a question about whether you're registered in the right township, there's a question about your absentee ballot, it didn't show up, and you have to file an affidavit of some kind. Perhaps you moved recently, and you have to show some sort of residency. I always say bring a picture ID of some kind, and bring some proofs of residency just in case. I always bring some with me to the poll, even if I leave them in my car. But it could be a utility bill. It could be your driver's license with a current address on it. It could be a passport. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So always be prepared no matter what.
Okay. So if you don't know where to go, what are some options? How do you find out where your polling places are?
Okay, so that's an easy one too. Online, you can go to gttp votinginfoproject.org. They have a full list of all of the polling precincts and where those are located in each state. They can also point you to your own county clerk's office that will tell you exactly where those are. I tend to like to go to the local ones myself because they're more up to date, although I haven't had anybody complaining that these weren't up to date. But in the alternative, you can call your county clerk or the township to find out where to vote.
Can you give us the web address one more time?
Absolutely. It's gttp votinginfoproject.org. So let's just say votingprojectinfo.org.
Okay, great.
Just search for it, you'll find it.
Yeah. And so what if I can't drive to the polls for lack of transportation, for any reason?
Right. And this is something that a lot of our elders, experience, and people with disabilities, and then often young people, right? So, and we know that our people live in areas that are sometimes far away from these polling places. So this is a really valid question. And to me, this is about preparation. So if you want your voice heard, and this is so important for our people, arrange a ride as hopefully a family member first, hopefully a friend that somebody that's going, because we also want to be safe. The COVID is here. We want people to know, we know that are safe. If you can't find a friend or a family member, check with your local township or county to see if there is assistance available to help you get there. And then finally, check with your local political party, whatever of your choice, to see if someone can give you a ride, because often those parties will have sort of a hotline set up, or at the very least, they'll know somebody that can give people rides or that is willing to.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, what about some basic rights that we just all should know about?
You know what? There's so many, and voting rights are complicated, but they're not rocket science. So that's the best part about it. So here's some good takeaways.
Okay.
One, you're not allowed to be questioned about your political beliefs by anyone. That's you don't need to respond if they do. That's part of what we call harassment. Mm. If you're in line to vote and the polls close, because there's, we know that there might be long lines due to COVID, you have a right to stay in your line and cast your vote. So they have to, even if it closes, they have to get everybody in line. If you make a mistake on your ballot, you are allowed to get a new ballot and redo it. Some people feel like, or have been told, oh, that's the only one you get, and that's simply not true. If the machines are down at your polling place, you have the right to a paper ballot. So just because their machines don't work doesn't mean you don't get to vote. And there's a number of hotlines available, and I'll give you a website at the end of this for people with any emergency needs regarding voting. So there's hotlines in English. In some states, there are Native American hotlines, and I'm part of that here in Michigan. There are hotlines in Spanish and Arabic, and all manners of languages. So this year, they're really trying to make that easy on people to vote. So take advantage.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What if there's a problem? You're there and you're not really sure what to do.
So there's a lot of things that can go wrong with voting. And most of the time, those things don't happen. Most of the time, we're okay. But the one thing I want to impress upon all of our Native voters is that what you're really looking for, if you go to the polls to vote, is to vote with a regular ballot that gets tabulated that night. Anytime you get a ballot that's challenged, anytime that someone marks your ballot or tells you you have to have a provisional ballot, that's where you should immediately stop, drop, and roll. And what I mean by that is look for a poll watcher and kind of make them aware of the situation. Because a lot of times when you go to the polls, you'll see poll challengers and poll watchers. And the poll watchers are usually the ones that are sort of there to make sure that people aren't doing things the wrong way and may advocate for you. They're not allowed to talk to you, though. The other thing is to call the voter protection hotlines that are in your area. And again, I'll give a list of that. Call them right away and say, what should I do? And more than likely, there will be someone available to walk you through that and help you advocate for yourself. So here's some common situations. So you go up to the polls and one of the workers says, you're not on the list of registered voters. What do you do? And first of all, you ask them to double check, make sure that you spell your name for them. If your name's not on the list, ask if there's a supplemental list of voters. If they still can't find your name, confirm that you're at the correct polling place. If you can also request that they check the statewide system, if one is available, to see if you are on it or if you're registered to vote elsewhere. You can even check this with your own smartphone. A lot of states have those right there online, and you can find it. And that sort of goes back to what I talked about, finding out if you're registered to vote. You should do this way ahead of time. So in some places, if your name isn't on their list, you can actually pull up what the state has and show it to them on your phone, and they have to let you vote.
Okay.
So, and if they don't have access to that statewide system, then call the election office, call a 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's a voter protection hotline. There's a lot of things that can happen if you find you're registered at a different location, and this happens a lot to people who have just moved. There's certain deadlines that people need to fall into to be able to vote within the precinct they just moved into. Quite often you have to go back to that old polling spot in order to vote. And if you can't, they'll give you a provisional ballot, which you often have to cure by turning in information to that county clerk within a certain number of days to show that you actually live there. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, but rest assured there are hotlines out there that can help people on the spot. And that's the important thing to know. Don't let anybody keep you from voting.
Yeah. What about intimidation or harassment? What does that look like?
So, unfortunately, this is kind of a hot topic this year. We know that politics in this country have reached sort of these real divisive levels in this past couple of years. And a lot of people are afraid that they're going to go to the polls and be harassed or intimidated. I know here in Michigan, we've had this whole militia thing going on where armed militia have threatened to show up at polls or, have shown up at our state capitol. And so there's a number of people that are afraid of that. But what's important to know as far as that's concerned is that it is a federal crime to intimidate, harass, or try to coerce any other person for the purpose of interfering with their right to vote. And that includes electioneering. You know, hardcore, we call it the hardcore electioneering. You know, you better vote this way or else. And that is against the law and should be immediately reported, not just to the election workers, but also to law enforcement. And that can also include just aggressively questioning a voter about their citizenship, their criminal records, their qualifications to vote. Sometimes we see this with election workers, unfortunately. That's illegal. Falsely representing oneself as an election official is illegal. Displaying false or misleading signs about voter fraud and related criminal penalties, that's considered to be harassment. And one that we see often is the harassment of non-English speakers and voters of color. And all of it is a federal crime. So people need to speak up for themselves when that happens, let people know it's happening. The other thing we need to know, and these are for people in particular who, you know, have either disabilities or have a hard time speaking English, you do not need to speak English to vote. That is not a requirement in any state. You do not need to pass a test to vote in any state. And some states don't even require you to present photo identification. So it's good to know what happens in your state. But, you know, I just want to remind people, please don't let this happen to you. Don't let anybody take your vote away. There's resources there to help you.
Wow, that's a lot of information.
It is. And I have pages more, but, you know, we only have so much time.
Yeah. So can you share with us some of the resources that you had mentioned before? So folks can get out a paper and pen or use their smartphone and take down some important numbers and resources that might be helpful to them.
Absolutely. So the one site that I want to point you to, and there are resources there I don't want to forget, are people with disabilities or non-English speakers. You know, people can't use disabilities against you in the voting or in the polls. They have to accommodate you, and you're allowed to bring people to help you. So there are hotlines that are specific to people with disabilities. There are also hotlines specific to people who can't speak English. So all of this information, though, it can be found on the aclu.org /know your rights, know your voting rights page. And they've done a fantastic job of compiling all of this information. And then the thing that I like about it is that a lot of their sites that they post to and they give you the links to refer back to your own local state. So you can get the most up-to-date information.
That's awesome. Thank you, Holly, so much.
Yes.
Final words to the masses out there?
Well, I'm so thankful that you're here. I'm so thankful that you're listening tonight, because every person that's been here tonight, every one of my fellow sisters, Gina, has had something really important to say. And our voice as Native people is really needed at this time. It's really needed, not just for us, but for everybody, particularly where we have an environment that we need to take care of. So we have women and children that need to be taken care of. We have sick relatives that need to be taken care of. So please use your voice. Don't be harassed or scared or deterred from voting because you don't have information. It's all here for you. And there's plenty of people that are willing to help and ready to help you. So go out and vote, and let's do this.
All right. Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your wisdom and your insight and preparing us and caring for us so we know our rights. So have a wonderful night, and thank you.
All right. You too.